I've said that, I usually say Davcat, because I've broadcast for 3 years using a pseudonym while I was cautious and fearful under a fascist-leaning Trump administration. But I'm also not a communist, despite my liberal use of the word fascism. I'm not a communist, I'm not a Marxist, and the word Marxism is trending today. So we'll have a look at why that is. We'll have a look at a definition of the word Marxism and why people who are at least lightly familiar with history don't typically embrace Marxism. So people who understand modern economics to a degree and the disproportionate power exerted over our socio-political climate by powerful corporate executives understand that the pendulum has swung over towards the direction of the uber wealthy, and that there's been a power imbalance that has only increased since Reagan was in office and implanted or helped promote various ideas which have influenced people's political leanings since that time in the United States. But who can place that understanding in a context of the revolutionary, idealistic young people, or even older people, because Bernie Sanders certainly isn't old, who embrace the practice of denouncing capitalism for all the ills of modern politics, are people who don't understand how many millions of people suffered and died under communist governments and communist ways of operating, which usually suffer from the naturalistic fallacy that everything would be better if we rejected modernity, if we returned to a more simple agrarian lifestyle where it was little happy rural communities and not large multinational businesses, just usually involves a rejection of modernity, because modernity has some associated problems. The only trouble is identifying problems doesn't mean you should throw out everything you have. And people who try and install communist revolutions end up being the kind of people who introduce massive mass slaughter situations, re-education camps, man-made famines, etc., between 30 to 50 million people dying under communism in China, under Chairman Mao's Great Leap Forward, because communists are often quite proud of their work and hesitant to accept scrutiny or consequences for their misdirected societal reorganizing goals. So that's why you have older voters who are often conservative leaning, because if they've been awake through history, it's shown them that whilst there's a lot of fear mongering about socialism that's irrational, there's also a lot of rational fear mongering about a government style of governance that, when embraced, leads to mass death. All right. Oh, I haven't turned my comments on. Kimchi is here. Hi, Kimchi. How are you doing? So, yes, thanks to everybody who's tuning in, and hi as well to any replay viewers who might wander this way. The breaking news is that this chap has been fired. What's his name? Lieutenant Colonel Matthew Lohmeyer. Now, yes, I do have up a post from a Trumpy person, Dr. Kelly Ward, who's the chairwoman of the Arizona GOP. Now, those people are really down the Trumpy rabbit hole, so I don't wish to assert in any way, shape, or form that I support her. But she has retweeted this military.com article that I thought would be worthwhile having a look at. And so that brings up that picture of Lieutenant Colonel Matthew Lohmeyer, who was fired because of his comments on a broadcast. And all of the conservative media are saying, outrage, outrage, outrage. He was fired because he mentioned Marxism and denounced Marxism. Clearly, the Biden administration is full of Marxists who can't tolerate truth about how they are Marxist. But if you read the article, and see what the man said, he appeared on a podcast called Information Operation, and he spoke about US institutions, including universities, media, and federal agencies, including the military, that he said are increasingly adopting leftist practices. These practices, according to him, such as diversity and inclusion training, are the systemic cause for the divisive climate across America today. So that's, I think, a more sound understanding of why he's fired. The dude's fired for being extremely racist and saying that diversity and inclusivity training in the military is making it Marxist, and that's a symptom of Marxist infiltration of American institutions. Because most responsible people in America now recognize there is a need for diversity training and inclusivity training as just a strategy for trying to reduce the corrosive impact of persistent racist ideologies and persistent racist biases. And it's hard to legislate racism out of people's hearts. It's hard to legislate or train racist ideas and practices out of people's minds. But people of good faith will normally accept the need to at least try without denouncing those practices as Marxism. So I think that was an important topic to address. It's important to at least make an effort to counter disinformation campaigns. We know that those types of campaigns are corrosive to the public's ability to understand what's going on, and that a deliberately misled public is a public that's more likely to participate in crimes such as the recent insurrection. Now, that's my other bit of hopeful stuff for the day, which is that it's unnerving, but there's simultaneously a silver lining to it. And when I say it, that's in reference to the Republican embrace of subterfuge, of an alternate reality in which the insurrection didn't happen, or it happened, but it was just like a picnic. Yes. Because Republicans must know that a lot of Americans watched the insurrection on the day it happened. They watched the American Capitol be ransacked. They watched the DC police and the Capitol police be essentially defeated as they struggled to hold the doors, and that there was a lot of hand-to-hand combat and fighting, and that persisted for hours. And it was embarrassing on an international scale, and it was scary for people watching to see if democracy would hold, or if those pro-Trump rioters would succeed in holding American democracy hostage so that they could overturn the results of the election and have Trump installed for a second term in defiance of the actual outcome of the election. So we know that there are now 67%, I think it's 33% of Republicans who believe that Joe Biden is the president now and is the legitimately elected president, which is the truth. And then the remaining 67%, which is a sizable majority of Republicans, have succumbed to the high-pressure campaign from the various disinformation conservative media outlets that exist now. Fox News, I was trying to say Fox News and Tucker Carlson at the same time. It nearly turned out very badly for me, but yes, Fox News, OAN, Sinclair News, etc., Newsmax, that do embrace the idea that Trump seeks to circulate, that it was the greatest theft ever, that of course everybody would have voted for him because he did such a great job with COVID and nobody should go to jail for that. It was fantastic. And yes, Trump was truly the man to lead America into economic health and high rates of public health, because that's what happened under his rule. Nobody died. Nobody's business went out of business. Nobody lost their job. Everything was hunky-dory. And I think I'll just look up now and play an ad, which was apparently very striking in the campaign against Trump in 2020. It was a campaign ad produced by the Lincoln Project, and it was called Morning in America. And I'll watch it because it's a moment of appropriate somberness. And I think it's important to touch base with what actually did happen in America under Trump, which is that America was failed at a collective level by their federal government at that time. America was failed and the world was failed because Trump was the leader of the free world and he misled everybody. He concealed his true understanding of the COVID virus, which was his understanding was because he's not an idiot, like the left sometimes pretend he is, because despising Trump was one way to cope with him, I guess. But he wasn't an idiot and he understood that COVID was airborne. He just had a political expedience that was separate to public health concerns. His political expedience drive was to be re-elected at all costs and to be re-elected through deception, through falsely presenting himself as an alternative to lockdowns and to the associated hardships of a responsible, scientific-based response to a pandemic, which is campaigns for public behavior modifications, using federal government powers to ramp up domestic production of personal protective equipment, and using government resources to equitably support those businesses which are most at risk of not loss of revenue, but loss of existence, viable financial existence. So lots of very sustainable companies, large companies, were given millions of dollars during the Trump administration dispensing of COVID aid. Shake Shack was given $10 million that they returned. I quote that as something people might remember from media reporting at the time, or can look up for themselves easily. Shake Shack returning $10 million because the Trump administration gave it to them, whilst a lot of Main Street businesses, mom and pop small businesses, were having to close their doors as a consequence of COVID lockdowns. So Trump wanted people to associate lockdowns with the Democrats and freedom and release from uncomfortable conditions with himself. So he told his followers that COVID wasn't real, that it was being overhyped, or that it was easily solved with just a hearty dose of good old hydroxychloroquine, the drug that was never an answer to COVID, but which Trump and his cronies seized upon because he wanted to be the person who was able to find solutions that others couldn't, and to be the champion of easy answers. So it didn't matter to Trump that it didn't work. In fact, that made it more important. He valued hydroxychloroquine more because it didn't work, because then that creates conflict. It creates some doctors speaking out and saying, and researchers speaking out and saying hydroxychloroquine doesn't seem to be viable and it seems to be too early to be recommending it and to have the FDA giving it emergency approval. There seems to be some concerning data that it doesn't help and that it increases frequency of heart arrhythmias in patients who take it for COVID-19. And instead, Trump gets extra publicity from the controversy. And in fact, Jared Kushner has gone on the record admitting to Bob Woodward as well that they lie on purpose to the media, because then when the lies are reported on, it creates extra controversy that again raises Trump's profile and feeds into sport dynamics, whereby people who are already predisposed to cheer for Trump cheer harder for him because of the drama on the field. Oh, they're saying Trump lies. How dare they? They're always attacking him. So Trump lied more because that dynamic reinforced his appeal to people who supported him. Molly's here and Christopher is here. Thanks for dropping in, guys. Nice to see you. I'm talking about something that I think is important. I think it's still important to talk about Trump and to understand how he wasn't as dumb as people thought he was, how he didn't just lie because he was a compulsive liar, but because that was a political strategy that was very beneficial to him. That Jared Kushner told Bob Woodward that the lying created controversy, which created more publicity. Donald Trump's just like Madonna. He understands that any publicity is good publicity. He became more famous around the world. It gave his followers more of a sense of achievement for backing him because defiance feels good. So Trump lied more to give his followers more of a dopamine hit from defying the reporting on mainstream media and defying doctors and researchers. He promoted hydroxychloroquine even more when it became evident that it didn't work to treat COVID-19 and was in fact a threat to existence for those patients who were prescribed it. And a lot of doctors who support Trump did order hydroxychloroquine for themselves. Not all doctors stay on top of research. Not all doctors think for themselves. A lot of doctors will just take things that some authority figures recommend to them. And Trump was the most unqualified person in the world to be making pharmaceutical recommendations to people, but he was also very powerful. And that power and that aura of success certainly was very attractive to some people with an appetite for respecting authority. Kim says hello to Molly and also notes that, yes, what Trump did was slow genocide. Yes, and I'm speaking about how that helped Trump and how it still continues to help Republicans. The approach of what some people call pseudo-populism, when you oppose policies and you obstruct legislation that would help American citizens, because you know that citizens who are in significant financial and emotional pain will be less capable of thinking clearly, that a wounded animal might just lash out at anybody, even people who are helping them. And I will say even and especially people who are helping them. If you know those wounded animals in many cases live in areas where conservative media is an inescapable presence in people's lives, because that conservative media has decades of practice at manipulating people emotionally and making them distrust government help and making them blind to the ways in which they already receive government help. So telling them, yes, you receive entitlements, but those Black people or Mexican people, they are trying to game the system. And it lies about, or conservative media often lies about what undocumented migrants receive in terms of help. It lies in terms of deceiving the public about the contributions made in tax terms by undocumented migrants who still have deductions made from their salaries using an individual tax number, an ITN, but who don't derive the same benefits from the system as American residents, official documented residents, because they don't have a social security number. So they're paying in to your Medicare systems and to your social security systems, but they're just not being able to extract a return. And Joe Biden will institute policies that will at least give people a pathway to citizenship eventually, so that people who have spent decades contributing to American tax coffers will, in their declining years, be able to receive some official benefits. Molly notes that slowing aid to Democrat states was disgusting. Yes, lying to Democrat states and Republican states was also disgusting. And I'll bring up the Woodward tapes video, because people need to hear that Trump admitted, knowing that COVID was airborne, on February the 7th of 2020, and that it's taken the World Health Organization until this month to admit that the principal mechanism of transmission of COVID is through the air, that it's primarily an airborne disease, and that its effects are fundamentally vascular as well. So it affects your respiratory system, but it also affects other bodily systems because it affects the permeability of your blood vessels. Okay, so I'm going to search for Woodward tapes, and I'm going to search for videos under the Woodward tapes. All right, well, I found something about the Woodward tapes, but it seems to be about racism, but we'll still have a listen.
A portion of that discussion.
Do you think there is systematic or institutional racism in this country?
Well, I think there is everywhere. I think probably less here than most places, or less here than many places.
Okay, but is it here in a way that it has an impact on people's lives?
I think it is, and it's unfortunate, but I think it is.
He keep lying and saying it isn't to everybody else.
Let's bring in the host of Syria. A portion of that discussion.
All right, so I've done a tremendous amount for the Black community, and I'm not feeling any love. Well, it's interesting. Trevor Noah did 6 minutes about it. When normal people get caught on tape admitting they lied to an entire country, they usually apologize, but Trump didn't become president by being normal. Yes? All right, let's see what this is. This is 1 minute of footage on the Woodward tapes. Let's have a listen. And this video was produced by The Recount.
Bob Woodward's controversial book about President Trump, Rage, is officially out today.
I actually got to read it last night. I read it very quickly, and it was very boring.
The legendary journalist talked to Mr. Trump 18 times for this book. In this newly released recording, the president admits to Woodward how deadly the coronavirus is.
This thing is a killer if it gets you. If you're the wrong person, you don't have a chance. It was the plague. And Bob, it's so easily transmissible, you wouldn't even believe it.
That was April 13th. What was the day before that? April 12th was Easter. Easter was the date he had circled on the calendar.
To have the country opened up and they're just raring to go. In June, the president held his first indoor rally in Tulsa. The president continues to engage in that behavior.
He held another indoor event
last night in Phoenix. You can see really very few people wearing masks. A lot of them are older and high-risk groups.
And what we know is that the president knows better.
I hope people pay attention to how the president actually thinks about this coronavirus behind closed doors. We're still in this.
All right, so April the 13th, he was saying it's so easily transmissible. I'm looking for I'm still looking for the part from the Woodward tape from the 7th of February, but that's okay. I really appreciate the person who has said very nice and easily understood explanation. If you're referring to me, thank you. I'm trying my best. I just want people to understand. I want people to understand how it served Trump to be thought of as an idiot, to be underestimated and dismissed by the left. But I will also say that the left did turn out to vote Trump out of office. They understood the urgency of this situation, the assumptions that are often collectively held by people who vote on the left, that racism exists and is systematically underserving people of color, that it that racism creates unequal justice under the law, and that it creates a denial of opportunity and a fundamentally unprincipled exclusion from jobs and from positions of power. That is really key. It's key to understand and acknowledge that problem in order to mitigate against it and move towards a more perfect union, a journey that will forever exist, because you can't legislate away racism. Racism doesn't evaporate when you have President Obama in office. In fact, that clearly helped to inflame the racism and the degree of backlash and the urge to strike back and revenge themselves for the hurt they received when their belief systems were challenged by having a smart, competent, universally or internationally acclaimed Black man in office who was also a Democrat. I think the racism was compounded by a degree of that hyperpartisanship, that if President Trump had been a Black Republican, his Blackness would have been less likely to hit extreme pain, craziness inducing territory on the part of many Republican voters. It was the pain of having lost an election together with the pain of having racist beliefs to be challenged. And you can see some people who voted for Obama eventually became Trumpists as well, because of the potency of conservative media in telling people that Obama was failing, in lying to the public about how debt works, and continually making people feel uneasy that America was going into debt in order to restart the economy. Obama notes now that he would go bigger for a stimulus, to go more into debt for a stimulus boost to the American economy, because every dollar you invest has a return of multiple dollars for the American people. Investing in America's infrastructure, investing in kickstarting a moribund or slowed or doldrums economy, it has worth to it, because America is full of potential, which is why you don't look at the budget as if it's a household budget. You say debt can be easily paid off if you have a functional economy, if you don't give in to the forces of economic contraction and say, oh, yep, well, don't borrow too much, because then that will just make the problem worse. You have to have a degree of bold leadership, and be prepared to go into debt. Be prepared to say, we are a country that excels. We have worked out a formula for excellence, and that involves having strong educational institutions that are refreshed and invigorated each year, because we have a high rate of migration, and migrants bring skills and drive and excellence and ingenuity and innovation and entrepreneurship to our nation, and that invigorates it. And the fact that we are attractive to migrants, to people of excellence from around the world, as well as just people who have a hunger to strive and provide for their families and excel and escape communism and escape corruption and escape all manner of things, that America is a land of opportunity, even with various flaws, such as a weighted political system that disproportionately gives power to white landowners, because of the original compromise of the Constitution, which said, don't worry, wealthy white landowners, come on board with this Constitution and the founding of America. We'll make sure that you can keep a thumb on the political scale, so that those pesky abolitionists can never force you to give up your slaves against your will. And that is the reason for the malapportionment of the Senate and the malapportioned influence of the Electoral College system that exists to be able to overturn the popular vote. The Electoral College system doesn't exist to make it more fair and to give the little guys a fair shot. When they say little guys, what they mean is low population density states that were low population density in terms of voters because they had more black slaves than white landowners. And that system was put into place for that reason, to be able to bring on board the wealthy people that were afraid of giving up their massive trajectory of wealth acquisition, their massive systems for profiteering at the expense of the lives and freedom of the black people they had enslaved and continued to profit from for hundreds of years. All right, we haven't had any comments for a little while, but hopefully people are still following along. I'm going to play this video about what Jared Kushner was taped saying. And from the screenshot, it would appear to be Trump is back in charge, not the doctors. And that's a comment to appeal to Trump's base, who were addicted to contrarian positioning, who were addicted to saying, haha, Trump's always defying those so-called experts and those so-called elites. And they are high on that defiance. And their addiction may have waned a little bit because Trump has been so thoroughly proved wrong by circumstances that are hard to deny for people who aren't thoroughly lost to cult thinking or cult of personality thinking, who aren't addicted to defiance. So you can see elements of that cult of personality in the flags of Trump that feature Trump drawn as a Rambo or a god. And the fact that they complain that Biden clearly didn't win the election because where are the flags of Biden drawn as a god? People sometimes share memes of Biden wearing sunglasses and looking friendly, but there's no drawings of him that show him being embraced by Jesus, with Jesus directing his pen as he writes executive orders. Sorry, Republicans, that isn't a sign that people weren't enthusiastic Biden voters. It's a sign that Biden voters aren't crazy. And I know crazy is not a popular term, so what else could I say? Biden voters aren't untethered from reality. There we go.
And the doctors warning him about the COVID threat. Jared Kushner talked to Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Bob Woodward back in April. With the president's blessing, remember, little context here, the early White House task force guidelines to slow the spread, those were issued in mid-March. 1 month later, the White House issued reopening guidelines as the president grew anxious that coronavirus restrictions were hurting the economy and his re-election chances. Listen here to Kushner describe this critical moment.
The last thing was kind of doing the guidelines, which was interesting. And that, in my mind, was almost like, it was almost like Trump getting the country back from the doctors, right? In the sense that what he now did was, he's going to own the open up. There were 3 phases. There was the panic phase, the pain phase, and then the comeback phase. That doesn't mean there's not still a lot of pain, and there won't be pain for a while. But that basically was, we've now put out rules to get back to work. Trump's now back in charge. It's not the doctors. They've kind of, we have like a negotiated settlement.
We had this audio because of our great special correspondent, Jamie Gangel, who is here with more. Jamie, just the tone there, the president getting the country back from the doctors.
So they wanted to sideline the doctors, simple and clear. They saw the doctors as adversaries. When you say negotiated settlement, it sounds more like the end of a war. And John, it just underscores the Trump-Kushner political strategy. They had one concern, Election Day.
Well, that's a shame. I thought this person was a nice, reasonable viewer. And then, I don't know, I hold CNN responsible for overhyping Trump during the lead up to the 2016 election. But why you would say that they are responsible for so many lies? I mean, what lies are you speaking about specifically? That was some factual reporting on tapes made of Jared Kushner literally speaking to Bob Woodward, a journalist who taped the encounter. So sorry that the screen was frozen, but I'm calling you out, dude, for why are you accusing CNN of lying when you could accuse them of just being over enthusiastic about reporting on Trump because he was ratings gold. Why would you bother to denigrate CNN when you have outright lying media establishments? But look, if you're here and you're listening, I guess that's a promising step to take, and promising in the context of very unrepentant liars on the part of the Republican Party that are still trying to lie to the American people that they didn't see, that they didn't witness an insurrection when they did. And video evidence exists, and video evidence can be replayed very easily on the television. Absolutely. Kim Chi remembers that Jared Kushner said that the surplus, the federal surplus, didn't belong to the states. He used the phrase, "it's our surplus." And people were concerned. Who does Jared Kushner mean when he says it's our surplus? He means it's ours, it belongs to the administration. And he sees the interests of the administration as being separate to the people who inhabit the states, that is to say, the states of the United States of America, that are supposed to be united, that are supposed to have a federal government that looks out for their interests. Yeah. So this kind of bullshit CNN and other social media mention, they lied about Trump continuously prior to his election and during his entire term. They lied about him. Are you trying to argue here? Even after Trump's out of office, and even after Joe Biden has managed to turn the ship around with regards to efficiently distributing the vaccinations, efficiently helping Americans recover from a public health disaster, and consequently helping the American economy recover. Are you seriously trying to disparage the media organizations that reported at least a little bit on Trump's lies, even when they couldn't bring themselves to say that Trump was lying, because of the cumulative effect of people, misbegotten, benighted people, attacking them for being biased in a left-leaning way, purely because they don't understand that reality at the current time has a left-leaning bias, because the right side of politics has become such unrepentant liars for so long. Yes, I too am biased. Everybody's got some biases, dude, and some of us are capable of self-reflection, and some of us are capable of being interested in verifiable empirical evidence. Some people enjoy being completely unmoored from reality and giving or implanting all of their trust, reposing all of their trust in a so-called billionaire who's actually been the biggest thief from the American people that they've ever known on a historical basis. So yes, CNN isn't being sued by Dominion. Newsmax has already reached a settlement with Dominion, election machine company that was being slandered as by Trump and by Trump cronies for helping steal the election from Trump. So if you think that CNN is lying to you when Newsmax is the organization that has had to apologize for misrepresenting the election and the election outcome and Dominion's reliability in terms of election machines, then you are like a pig in mud, just enjoying the sensation of rolling around in it without any care for verifiable truth. And I'm happy to have the opportunity to call people out for doing that, because I think while we on the left do sometimes castigate Republican politicians for lying, and we do privately criticize Republican voters for having an appetite for lies, at a political level or a people in power level, you won't hear them much call out members of the public who are being irresponsible with their appetite for media sources that lie to them repeatedly. Lie to them in a really manipulative and just destructively impactful way. So all the times that Fox News has lied to its audience about the efficacy of vaccines, they underplay the efficacy of vaccines and they overplay the efficacy of hydroxychloroquine. In fact, they completely misrepresent the efficacy of hydroxychloroquine because you shouldn't take hydroxychloroquine if you have COVID. It can make your heart stop. It can make your heart lose its rhythms. It can make the electrical regulation of your heart function to malfunction. Molly would also like to note that let's remember that some of the personal protective equipment and ventilators were stolen from New York hospitals. Oh, I don't remember that reporting, Molly. I do remember that under Trump, FEMA were accused of stealing or commandeering resources from state governors who had ordered supplies of testing equipment and masks and gowns and ventilators, and FEMA officials would stop these deliveries and confiscate them. And there was no accountability. People weren't getting told where were these confiscated supplies going, what was happening to them, why were they being confiscated, and under whose authority. That was all very murky, and it did appear to be a sabotage of various states' efforts to mitigate against the disease. Now, that occurred even to Republican governors. I'm thinking specifically of Governor Larry Hogan of Maryland, who had to circumvent FEMA, who had to disguise deliveries that he was having shipped in from South Korea and disguise deliveries from other places in order to avoid having these supplies confiscated, in order to advocate more effectively for his people and deliver them the supplies they needed to have testing to identify where COVID was, to more effectively contain the disease. Molly's making a nice cheerful point as well that the FBI has been empowered to investigate white supremacist groups now that Biden is in office. Yes, it's nice to have an FBI and a DOJ that have some appointees in leadership positions who are acting in good faith to protect Americans and not to protect an illegitimate president illegitimately occupying office. So that's always nice, isn't it? Are you going out, darling?
Yeah.
Is it because you can't take listening to your wife's voice, or just because you...
No, just to move. I've been sitting in front of the computer.
Oh, that's good. I've been trying to talk not too loud, but...
It's fine. Don't worry about it.
Thanks, sweetie. My husband doesn't mind. See? I've got a supportive husband, which is of incalculable value to an amateur broadcaster such as myself. I don't have an office space where I can close a door. So my husband, who works from home, gets to listen every time I do a broadcast. All right, let's find another video because there are a few.
10% of which...
I found something which I've been looking for a little while, and that is a video where they've contrastively put Trump's public statements with what was eventually released of Trump's private statements to Bob Woodward. So you can see that this man was capable of compartmentalizing truth that he understood, and then the truth, the alternate version of the truth that he told the public. And later on, when he was exposed for those lies, he said, I wanted to be a cheerleader, at which point he's appealing to the appetite of some Americans for fictitious positivity, where you adhere to the belief that it will make things better to lie about them in a positive, as long as you're doing it in a positive way. So don't make up negative lies about things, but provided you lie positively, that'll just inspire people. That'll inspire the pandemic to vanish. So that unhealthy appetite for positive lies is something that Americans need to address going forwards, because it's dangerous. And when you identify an appetite for dangerous things, you have to call it out. You have to talk about it. You have to raise awareness of it so it doesn't happen again. Yay, Molly says my husband is a keeper. All right, sorry for putting that man's face up there. I will make use of it by playing it.
9% of which are totally harmless.
Not just older
Exactly.
people, to plenty of young people.
Young people are almost immune to this disease.
It's also more deadly than your strenuous flus.
We lose thousands and thousands of people a year to the flu. We don't turn the country off.
I wanted to always play it down. I still like playing it down.
9% of.
This is interesting. The ad isn't particularly well organized at a chronological level. That says July the 5th, but that's the beginning. So I've seen another video that organizes it chronologically. So you hear what Trump said privately and then his contemporaneous remarks publicly. But that's still something, the exposure of that. Imagine what happened to Republican voters who weren't entirely enamored of Trump, but at least thought, oh, well, in line with my Republican beliefs, that tax cuts, they're not just good for me. I mean, I like them, but surely they're good for the economy. Surely they generate economic activity. People with a predilection for believing Republicans would have had some of those beliefs challenged and eroded by being exposed to ads like that, which highlighted the discrepancy between Trump and Trump's public and private pronouncements, that he knew it was deadly, that he knew it would affect young people as well as old. Think of Republicans that might have been in denial that their family members died of COVID, because denial impacts a lot of people, but some people, particularly educated people, are going to struggle to keep up that self-deception. And there'll be part of them that says, okay, it does say COVID on the death certificate. Maybe my family member had other comorbidities, but COVID seems to have been a precipitating factor in their death. Even though I didn't want to believe it, it seems to be true that COVID wasn't just a made-up, overhyped Democratic problem. COVID wasn't a construct of the media. COVID was a pandemic. It needed a serious-minded approach, and it didn't get a serious-minded approach. It got a frivolous approach from a self-serving president who put his own re-election interests ahead of the interests of the American people, who sought to spin a story to Americans rather than buckle down and undertake the work that was needed to keep people safe, to reduce the spread of the disease. He didn't want to take any of the difficult, responsible steps. He always instead wanted to cheerlead for himself as a liberator, even when leaders don't liberate before the pandemic is over. Leaders respond with concern to real data and not just to what people want to hear. Fascist leaders always have a talent for telling people what they want to hear. Fascist leaders are great emotional sympathizers who say, you feel badly done by, don't you? You feel like Germany should have won World War I. Germany's great. Germany shouldn't have to pay reparations to another country. Somebody must have betrayed us in order for that bad outcome to happen, in order for Germany to have lost. You know who betrayed us? Jews. Trump, like Hitler, is great for finding an already disdained demographic subgroup. Trump is great, like Hitler, at finding beliefs that already existed in the community, just as Hitler found those beliefs because it was easy. He too shared them. Trump is a racist, just as Hitler was. Hitler couldn't cope very well when an American athlete, Jesse Owens, won a medal in the Berlin Olympics. He also had false ideas of the superiority, the inherent superiority of white people. So when Trump kisses up to some person with black skin color like Kanye, doesn't mean he's not racist. It means his political instincts are strong enough for him to say, yes, absolutely, I make exceptions for wealthy black people. And in fact, I know that politics is additive and every vote counts. And so I'm happy to ostensibly pay lip service to how much I love black people, and particularly black Christian people who are already well practiced at believing things that aren't entirely true and sort of putting magical faith in people. So people who are hyper religious are more susceptible to Trump's magical thinking, just because of the practice that religion gives you in finding community and solace in believing things that aren't capable of being empirically proven or disproven. That's just one of the bonding capabilities of religion, and I don't mean to say that in an entirely disparaging way about religion. Religion is often very necessary to people because humans are very imaginative creatures. We're capable of imagining things that inspire us, and we're capable of imagining things that make us anxious. We're capable of over-focusing on problems to an extent that we can paralyze ourselves in an emotional sense and a physical sense as well. We can literally cause ourselves paralysis. So religion is a way to find social relief and group harmony and finding unity in overarching values that help us see beyond ourselves and our own personal narrow interests. Religion has a lot of potential for greatness and the power of prayer to help people find reassurance and belief. I pray too, as an agnostic, and I'm essentially an atheist, but an agnostic because I don't want to be too abrasive to other people's deeply held beliefs. I say, yep, sure. Any gods could be true, because the important thing is that you are able to pray and feel reassured and feel motivated to do good. Those are all very important things. But I also value not using religion to oppress people, not using religion to make children be more compliant through inducing a terrifying phobia of hell and a terrifying phobia of being left behind when the rapture occurs. I don't approve of using religion to feed into people's false sense of entitlements, that they belong, a certain holy land belongs to them. And I know evangelical Christians think that the rapture will occur when a precondition is met of the holy land of Israel being entirely filled with Jews and not people of any other religious background. I believe a lot of fundamentalist religious Jews have that same belief as well, not about the rapture, but that Israel should only be occupied by people of Jewish background. Brett Walker is here. Hello, Brett. I'm having a little discussion of how important religion is to helping mitigate people's predilections for anxiety or depression or paralysis or just lack of motivation. Religion can be very motivating for good, and there's some downsides to religion as well. Molly sends her intentions out to the universe and hope that whoever needs energy gets it. Well, that leads me to another point, that when you pray for a good outcome, it helps you find a point of focus that you may then direct your energies towards as well. Because identity is a very motivating component of our personalities. When we believe we are good, then we're more likely to act in ways to support that belief, because it's uncomfortable to believe that we're good if we don't do good things. So that it works like that for some people. They believe they're good and then they donate to some charities and they do good works. Or they are kind to others. That's important. It's important to send your energy out into the universe because the very practice of that is like planting vegetables in your garden. You're more likely to eat them. Marsha also notes that Trump is a dangerous entity. Yes, he's taken the mask off of a lot of quiet Republican practices of hurting people in exchange for increased political power, causing people financial and emotional pain so that they can't think straight and are just more likely to buy into tribalistic political responses that say Republicans good, Democrats bad, television said so. And I am personally struggling because for some reason I don't have easy access to medical care. For some reason, the Republicans who govern my state have opposed Medicaid expansion, and now I can't get help easily for my elderly parents, or I can't get treatment for my wife's cancer easily. People in pain are less capable of voting in a different way to their parents. People who are in pain are more stuck in ruts of tribalistic political thinking and acting. Oh, Knowledge is here too. Hello, Knowledge, Molly, Marsha. Good to have the gang with us. All right. So that was an important video to watch. Oh, and here we have a 10-second video of just Trump trying to explain, after he was exposed via the Woodward tapes, Trump trying to explain why he indulged in this fantastical positivity, this made-up positive representation of a pandemic, which needs clear-headed, hard-headed thinking and responding. He says he didn't want to panic. See, he was mitigating against the conditions of a panic instead of mitigating against the conditions of a pandemic, because obviously a panic's worse than a pandemic. You could have toilet paper shortages if you allow for a panic, if you don't trick people into believing that COVID's not too bad. You could have toilet paper shortages. That's much worse than 60,000, 600,000 dead Americans and millions of Americans with a debilitating long-term condition that impairs their brain function, their liver function, their kidney function, etc. Much better, Trump. Thank you for being a cheerleader and avoiding panics by lying to people and deceiving them with regards to what you knew about the airborne nature of COVID spread and the high transmissibility and the fact that it does impact younger people, middle-aged people, as well as the elderly, and that it's a mistake to think you're invincible as long as you're not particularly elderly. All right, I'll play this video. It's only 10 seconds long. Nope. Oh, that's not working. Can you hear anything, guys? I cannot hear anything. Oh, maybe I've pressed mute here. Let's have a look. No? Well, if you can hear it, I don't want to be subjecting you to the same thing over and over again, so I'll just stop. Oh, hooray, we have a Biden response to the Woodward tapes. That's good. A responsible leader showing, which anchors this in time. I still can't hear anything.
Washington Post columnist Bob Woodward that the President of the United States has admitted on tape in February he knew about COVID-19 that had passed through the air. He knew how deadly it was. It was much more deadly than the flu. He knew and purposely played it down. Worse, he lied to the American people. He knowingly and willingly lied about the threat it posed to the country for months. He had the information. He knew how dangerous it was. And while this deadly disease ripped through our nation, he failed to do his job on purpose. It was a life and death betrayal of the American people. Experts say that if he had acted just 1 week sooner, 36,000 people would have been saved. If he acted 2 weeks sooner, back in March, 54,000 lives would have been spared in March and April alone. You know, his failure has not only cost lives, it sent our economy in a tailspin. It cost millions more in American livelihoods. This is a recession created by Donald Trump's negligence, and he is unfit for this job as a consequence of it. How many schools aren't open right now? How many kids are starting the new school year the same way they ended the last one, at home? How many parents feel abandoned and overwhelmed? How many frontline workers are exhausted and pushed to their limits? And how many families are missing loved ones at their dinner table tonight because of his failures? It's beyond despicable. It's a dereliction of duty. It's a disgrace.
Yeah, Biden definitely was the right person for the job of president, and the Democratic candidate. He was very emphatic in his condemnation of Trump. Marsha says, he was almost implicated in my possibility of dying because in early March 2020, the ORs were shut down to those of us who needed cancer surgery. I considered writing my book, Cancer in the Pandemic. My outcome is much worse than if I had had earlier surgery. Oh, that's true, Marsha. We forget to think about that as well. There's the economic hardship caused by the failure to contain COVID, the failure to take COVID seriously, the investment, the need to lie about COVID, to falsely portray himself as a cheerleader, or to falsely portray himself as a hero who saved America through positivity, through devotion to always representing a sunny side to the American people and not the concerning truth in order to avoid a panic. Yes, sometimes there are gas shortages when people panic. I heard that pipeline gas shortage was caused by the gas and oil company itself turning off a pipeline because of the hack made it a concern that they wouldn't be able to charge people for gas. They weren't going to be able to properly register how much gas people were using, so they wouldn't be able to charge them for it. So rather than have free gas given to people, they just turned off the pipelines. And then there was hoarding, yes. And people acted in a way that did seem kind of selfish and greedy. But yes, that's sometimes a product of panic. So back to Marsha's point, the other victims of that fascist style of governance that involves catering to people's emotions and to their expectations rather than working with reality, even an unpleasant reality. That also harmed patients of hospitals who needed to be able to move freely in and out of hospitals to receive treatment, who were deprived of surgery that would increase their chance of life and increase their longevity potential. So all of those people who were harmed, and all of that harm is then mischaracterized often by Republicans as being harm caused by Democrats because of lockdowns. Lockdowns were a rational response to an escalating crisis. Being fake positive about a pandemic and pretending it didn't exist and that it didn't need to be tested for and it didn't need to be responded to, which prolonged the pandemic, which exacerbated the pandemic, that is the cause of the suffering. And we have to be clear about that because Republicans are not tethered to reality in terms of who they will blame and who they will cast aspersions on and who they will manage to persuasively tell their voters is responsible for the suffering that they and their leader has caused the American people. Indoor Smokers notes that, yes, first Trump claimed that COVID was going to disappear on its own. It was going to magically disappear by April. And then he also tried to burnish his own scientific credentials. He thought he would be acclaimed for his clever speculation about different strategies for combating COVID. He thought, genius, I'm matching up the known ability of disinfectant to kill the virus on surfaces with a speculation that maybe internal bodily surfaces could be fixed, that he was potentially going to be the savior of medical research because he was able to put 2 and 2 together and say disinfectant works on COVID outside the body. What about inside the body? Without realizing that this would betray his basic ignorance of the fact that disinfectant is lethal if ingested internally. Oh, somebody's comments are being muted by moderators. Not for any good reason, particularly. Because you asked if I'm married. Yes, I am married. I am happily married. Everybody will tell you my children often play a starring role in my broadcasts, or at least my daughter does, because she's chatty. All right, so this is a video made on September the 10th. It's got 2.3 million views. Ooh.
Coronavirus, Disney's closed, movie theaters are closed, hospitals being built. I think we're now up to our 8th case in the United States. How concerned are you?
My father was one of the boys. He loved to have a good time. He loved to laugh. We were very close. In February, he fell and he broke his hip. They sent him to a rehab that was a / nursing home. I went to go visit him and we weren't allowed in. We were then told that my father had had a fever for 5 days.
By April, in theory, when it gets a little warmer, it miraculously goes away.
There were tests, but by the time they reached my father, they had run out.
Gentlemen, start your engines.
We had a nurse put my dad on the phone, and he would tell us he wanted to go home. And that's the last time that I spoke to my dad. The nurse told my brother that my father had passed. He had just turned 78 2 days before he passed.
Coronavirus. This is their new hoax.
In November, we are literally voting for our lives.
Yeah. So the important thing about that is there are a lot of people who've lost family members to Trumpism, to Trump-style fascism, where you say what people want to hear. You say what your base wants to hear. You don't say what the crisis should compel you to say. You don't say this is a serious problem. Yes, we have to be concerned about China's actions. Trump instead said China's doing a great job. He wanted a Chinese government signature on his trade deal so that he could hide the escalating manufacturing recession that was occurring as a consequence of his bad actions in starting and escalating a trade war with all of America's major trading partners. Trump wanted to hide that there was a recession in the manufacturing sector, that indicators of growth were showing 2 consecutive quarters of contraction. There was a recession in the manufacturing sector, which disproportionately employs people in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, the 3 states that were critical to his electoral college victory over Hillary Clinton in 2016. Trump was motivated to lie to the American people about COVID because he was kissing up to the Chinese government in December and in January. So even as America's intelligence agencies told him that there was a pandemic, these intelligence agencies with mega budgets that are paid for by your taxpayer dollars. Even as those employees whispered to Trump in private briefings, there is a pandemic. There is this outbreak with global potential. It is killing people in China. China is building hospitals in a matter of days to help mitigate the risks of this disease that is very transmissible, that appears to be spread through airborne mechanisms, which makes it highly contagious. It's not just older people who are dying. There are people from different age groups dying. The deaths are concentrated amongst the elderly, but it impacts middle-aged people as well. And it's going to create fear, and it's going to bring down the economy. The administration had private briefings for people from various institutes like the, what is Scott? I have to find the institute, hang on. It starts with H, not Hudson Institute. President Bush in 2005 said both sides ought to be properly taught with regards to evolution. Lordy. Oh, hey, look, Red's commenting 2 minutes ago. Let's have a look. Christopher says, why are we not hearing authorities and politicians wanting to pursue Trump for treason? Marsha says, we will. And Kim says, why are we held hostage by a vocal, insane minority of 32% of the population? Well, my answer to that is that whenever there is a large disjunction between urban populations and rural populations, that there are built-in safeguards in the American Constitution to put a thumb on the scale of the rural voters. So you are held hostage to a vocal, insane minority of the population because the original white Christian landowners didn't want to join America, didn't want to acquiesce to the founding of America as a distinct nation from Britain, as an autonomous nation, as a self-determining nation. They didn't want to join the United States of America unless they had promises that nobody would take their slaves from them, that nobody would take their system of massive wealth acquisition away from them. So the built-in compromises to reassure those people that no virtue signaling people, no virtue signaling white voters from the North or from various parts of the country would be able to take away the legality of wealth generation via enslaved people, enslaved Black people. The compromises were the 3/5 compromise, which allowed white landowners, white Christian landowners, to count 3 out of every 5 slave bodies to their population totals, meaning their political power, the influence of their state, the number of representatives that would be allocated to their district would be calculated based on the number of not only white voters, but non-voting, non-right holding, non-personhood, legally recognized personhood, totally disenfranchised, totally legally unprotected slave people. Their bodies were counted. They weren't given 3/5 of the rights of white people. They weren't given 3/5 of the acknowledgement of a white person. They were given no acknowledgement of their personhood or the need for political power or rights or freedom or self-determination or anything, but 3 out of every 5 of their bodies were counted towards the population tallies that were used in the early days of America's founding to tabulate populations, to say, this is how many representatives will represent that district. It wasn't a measure of how many voters were in that district. There was disproportionate political power allocated to districts that had a lot of bodies of non-voting slave bodies. So that was the initial calculation of representatives. And similarly, the move to give 2 senators to each state, regardless of population size. That gets described as malapportionment in the Senate. It means disproportionate political power is afforded to the voters who live in small states, states that are not small in landmass size. So they'll feature heavily on maps of Trump victories, but they are small in population size because a lot of their land usage historically devoted to agricultural land, and that agricultural land was originally extremely profitable because of the ability to employ slaves to generate revenue for landowners. Now, you can make agriculture profitable if you have a lot of land and a lot of modern technology, because America has embraced the intellect as a path to wealth and not just the unprincipled willingness to exploit entrapped, enslaved human beings for profit. So that is why there is a persistent hostage situation in America where popular policies cannot be legislated, cannot be enshrined into practice because of a vocal, gun-toting, religious white minority group. If they're not white landowners themselves, they affiliate their loyalties with white landowners because they have been taught that that is the manifestation of Christianity, and they have been taught that Democrats are heathen, baby-eating villains because since Ronald Reagan, since Newt Gingrich, since Nixon, there has been a purposeful effort to psychologically influence the population, to conflate drug usage and with criminality, and therefore hippies are criminals and Black people who smoke marijuana are criminals. Brett made a point 8 minutes ago. I meant to come to it. Sorry, I had a big explainer about the baked-in white affirmative action of the Constitution, namely the 3/5 compromise and Senate malapportionment and the Electoral College. Did I even get to the Electoral College? 3 things. The 3/5 compromise doesn't exist anymore, but there were originally 3 things. Now there's still 2, the Electoral College and the Senate. And the fact that Republicans were able to add some extra states in 1889 and 1890. Montana, Wyoming, North Dakota, and South Dakota were added to the total of American states, giving the Republican Party, again, a disproportionate ability to control the Senate, or to a disproportionate chance to win control of the Senate, even when a majority of voters vote for Democratic senators. So Brett's point is that the same reason they didn't go after Bush Jr. for war crimes, it's a political calculation. They just want to sweep everything under the rug. I'll say that's true to a degree because that has been true for a long time. There's been an unwillingness to call out Republicans for crimes committed by Republican politicians and Republican powerful cronies in the NRA, etc. But we have to acknowledge that's not just something they do for fun. That's a situation that arises because the refs have been worked. And some of those refs are the refs of the American people, the American voting public. Too many of them have an appetite for Republican lies. So you can't just blame they didn't go after George Bush. Voters didn't go after George Bush Jr. Voters still kept voting for Republicans in too high numbers, even when a majority of Americans rejected the Iraq War as having been a confected emergency. Oh, we've got to go to war with Iraq because we have to get weapons of mass destruction. Oh, wait, that was a lie. They kind of knew it was a lie. They pretty much definitely knew it was a lie, but they were really keen to pursue it because there were some people who knew they could generate extensive profit, and there were some people who were just really committed to satiating American bloodlust after 9/11, satiating American appetite for revenge, satiating American appetite for killing people with brown skin to demonstrate power, military might. And don't you, anybody who might think about bombing America again or turning an airplane into a bomb, don't even think about doing that again. Regard American geopolitical might, regard our military might. It's why the military has a blank check. Audits, the rare audits of the Pentagon often turn up the fact that billions of dollars are missing and in terms of can't be accounted for with any type of paper trail. The military has a blank check from the American taxpayer because of safety concerns. America understands it's a desirable target for foreign aggression because it's successful in the way that some people can't cope with the success of others. So Americans know that they want to invest in their own safety, but they're also tricked into thinking unlimited military spending will buy safety when it can also buy heedlessness. America was not prepared to cope with a presidential candidate who exemplified xenophobic bloodlust. That was Donald Trump. I recognize the xenophobic bloodlust because my ancestors were killed by Nazis. Not that all Holocaust surviving grandchildren or the grandchildren of Holocaust survivors were awake in that same way to that threat, but many of us were. Many of us said, oh, I recognize that rhetoric. That's Hitler-style rhetoric where you amplify pre-existing racist sentiments in the community. You disparage an entire ethnic group and you abuse individual data points. You abuse instances of crime. You say, here is a woman whose daughter was killed by a migrant, which is proof that all migrants are unwelcome guests. All undocumented migrants are unwelcome intruders who should be expelled because they're clearly all bad. That is xenophobic bloodlust. Hitler did it with Jewish people. I recognize it. Lots of people recognize it. It was more popular than many Americans recognized. I recognize that that type of behavior might be unpopular to start with. It was unpopular with Germans initially. Hitler just kept working away at the psyche of the German people until he had 33% support. It was enough for the then Chancellor of Germany to offer him a position to say, okay, your supporters are quite violent. I'll placate them by offering you a position in a government coalition. You can't placate a xenophobic bloodlust or someone who exemplifies xenophobic bloodlust and whose escalating power is tied to amplification of xenophobic bloodlust. I keep saying that, but it's just because the expression strikes me as apt right now. Hitler sabotaged democracy in Germany. He rendered himself fully unaccountable. And Trump made a lot of effort to remove himself from accountability as well. And it's a triumph of the American spirit that enough media was able to function, even in a climate of working the refs and pretending that all criticism of Trump was just media bashing, left-biased media bashing of a good man an honest man who had the interests of his people at heart, a good man prepared to defend America from all of the Mexican rapists. Oops, there's 14 new comments that I haven't engaged with recently. Indoor Smoker says we need a modern day John Brown to lead the fight. Molly says that she's impressed with how outraged Republicans are about teaching Black history in line with American history. Yes, it's an important comment, Molly, because they can confect outrage very easily because they don't have to really feel outraged. They are rewarded by the political support that is generated by feeding into an outrage narrative, because outrage feels good. It feels good to have the moral clarity to be mad at someone. Damn it, I'm mad with modern people. They're weak, they're indulgent, they teach history to try and make us feel guilty. Well, I'm just going to believe the people who tell us that's not really history anyway. How dare they? They're making up history to make us feel bad. They're pretending that slavery was so bad. They're pretending that redlining existed and that Black people were excluded from the ability to obtain a government-backed mortgage. They're pretending that we did these things. And of course, conservative media will focus on any excesses of self-flagellation, psychological self-flagellation exhibited by the far left. So yeah, there are people on the far left who says, yes, you should feel terrible if you're a white person, that your ancestors did things, that you yourself benefit from systems that you didn't organize personally, but yes, you're culpable, that whiteness is culpability. I mean, whiteness can certainly be inadvertent benefiting from systems of reoccurring, persistent deprivation, depriving Black Americans of opportunity, gatekeeping them away from jobs, gatekeeping them out of educational institutions, making them have to work so hard and take on so much debt to participate in the trappings of white meritocracy success. Black people have disproportionately high levels of student debt relative to white people, who are more likely to have intergenerational wealth that can pay for college up front or help pay off debts faster and earlier. And yes, white people who don't have privilege or wealth doesn't disprove the fact that there have been educational gatekeepers making tertiary education more expensive with the goal of keeping Black people away, with the goal of deterring Black people from disproving the myth of white superiority by getting an education. But you can't stop determined people. Black people have been determined to say what you said about us isn't true. We are not stupid. We have the same capacity as you to acquire knowledge, to excel in educational institutions. So they've taken on a huge amount of debt, and you could deter some people, but you couldn't deter everybody, because Black pride is real. And whenever you have people perpetuating a lie of racial inferiority on the part of some ethnic group, you will have a fever in the bosoms of some who will say, I will learn to read and write, even though I'm forbidden as a slave, even though I'm forced to attend church services where they read aloud to me from a church, a slave Bible, where they've cut out the parts about freedom and they've cut out the parts about oppressed people revolting against oppressors, and they highlight passages that emphasize slavish obedience. Slaves have revolted. Black people have been persistently patriotic in service to the better ideals of America, and have been able to temporarily ignore the persistent patterns of systemic racism and oppression. They have tried to believe in America's best self. Black American soldiers joined war efforts and fought for their country in the hope that they too would receive the same benefits as white soldiers returning from battle, but they didn't. There were ways and means found to exclude returning Black GI service members from the access to government-backed mortgages and the access to government-funded college places. So a lot of intergenerational wealth has been withheld from Black families. And look, the battle still goes on. Joe Biden's administration understands it, and Joe Biden's administration will continue to articulate that. And so will I, because every piece of shared knowledge and shared understanding is a thorn in the side of the liars who seek to hide history from people, who work in tandem with people's appetite for complacency and ignorance. And there is an appetite for comfort. There is an appetite to reach out for the narratives that claim innocence, that hide culpability, that hide the persistent nature of racist practices, of practices of depriving Black people of what they are owed, the practices of stealing from Black people their share of taxpayer-funded services, so that even when they paid tax, the schools were segregated in a way that funneled the lion's share of those taxes to white children. That was why schools needed to be desegregated, not just because it's not nice to say white children and Black children have to be separated, not just because it's degrading to imply that the races have to be separated, but because it was necessary to make white people care about the conditions of the schools that were attended by Black students. There wasn't enough political power to say, hey, make sure schools attended by minority students have books, have heating supplies in the winter, have school buses servicing them to help children get to school. It wasn't enough to argue for that. You had to integrate the schools so that white parents would also lend their powerful political voices to that need, to speak to the need to have adequate supplies and adequate facilities for students. If you don't have integrated schools, then the white majority don't care enough about what happens to Black students. So you only have equality of service distribution when you have desegregation, when you have integration of both Black and white Americans. Otherwise, you're catering to people's tendencies to identify in tribalistic ways with people who share their skin color and ignore the theft from Black taxpayers. Because I assure you all that tax does not discriminate between color. The tax collectors do not say, oh, well, we should charge a lower rate of tax to Black Americans because, to be frank, they have no chance of getting the same level of service. So they shouldn't have to pay as much tax. Tax does not see color. Tax is colorblind. You pay the same rate of tax per your income as a white person, but you will not get the same level of service provision from your government, local, state, or federal, if you do not have white voters who will advocate for you as powerfully as they will for themselves. And that is my concluding statement for today. Hey, Knowledge says this is a great topic. And wow, Indoor Smokes gave me a $5 monthly scholarship. Well, bless your heart, Indoor Smokers. That's so kind of you. And Kimchi, thank you for, and I'm very grateful you're doing this, taking it upon yourself, even when I'm mid-rant, for timely recognition of people who step up to reinforce my work in articulating for Americans and for anybody with the time or the inclination to listen exactly what history involves in terms of anti-Black philosophy, and anti-Black practices. So yes, Indoor Smokers most certainly is a guy, and he has a YouTube channel devoted to helping people vape. Kim notes that the wax display of hanging John Brown affected her deeply as a child and just realized that, and says, thanks, Indoor Smokers. We'll have to do a John Brown episode then. And Brett gave me an Appreciate Award. Thank you, Brett. I appreciate being appreciated. Molly notes that they portrayed Jesus as someone with blue eyes and blonde or sandy hair color. And yes, that's a critical center point of white supremacist ideology, that you represent Jesus as white, you coalesce your loyalties, your sympathies around your tribal identification as Christians, led by a white, blue-eyed Christian man who was actually Middle Eastern, Jewish, likely brown-skinned and brown-eyed and swarthy complexioned. But it doesn't matter. If I assert that now, there is a very strong community bond amongst evangelical Christians, but their numbers are eroding because of modernity. Modern technology such as the internet, it allows for the spread of disinformation, but it also allows young people to recognize that a lot of white evangelical Christian teachings are brainwashing rather than informational. They're not telling you the truth about the rapture. They're not telling you the truth about the risk of going to hell. They're inducing mental dysfunction in a lot of people, even as they offer the joys of community and communal loyalties. There's some extremely expensive and detrimental downsides to a lot of white evangelical Christian teachings. There's a lot of racism, sexism, and just othering of people who are divergent, neurodivergent, gender divergent, sexuality divergent. People who are not typical white Christian heterosexual people. And look, there's a lot of divergent white Christian heterosexual people as well who are power abusers, who abuse children. Even if they're abusing them in a heterosexual way, it's still, it's not the kind of divergence you want to tolerate because it's abusive. Homosexuality between consenting adults or even consenting adolescents, that's not abusive. That's people following the dictates of their heart in a way that allows for consent and allows for mutual respect. There can be abuse within heterosexual relationships as well, and abusive dynamics and lack of consent and rape and everything. But there should be no broadly accepted prerogative that heterosexuality is something that people should be trained out of, that people should be coerced out of, that people should be sent to, what are they called? What's it called when you have to go to a camp that will train you not to be gay? And it's now illegal in some states. Somebody might know. I'm going to check out the comments. I got another Appreciate Award from Indoor Smokers. Indoor Smokers also says, does anyone remember the TV series Roots that probably affected me the most as a child? I certainly haven't seen it because I'm Australian. It wasn't in Australia, but I have seen Americans before note that they have been affected by that series called Roots. And I know now that there's a publication called The Root that often gives me a lot of high quality information. In fact, I have oh my goodness, it's already so late. Sorry for keeping you guys up. I'll share one last thing, and it's an article from The Root about history textbooks. Oh, yep, here we go. The title of the article is The Textbooks Used by Senators Who Opposed the 1619 Project. Conversion therapy. There you go. I knew somebody would know it. Thank you, Molly. It's you. So this is just, oh, no, that's not the right one. Here we go. We found the textbooks of senators who opposed the 1619 project, and suddenly everything makes sense. This was published on the 6th of May, so it's a recent article, and it goes through a lot of the different textbooks, and that the textbooks that would have been in vogue when these senators were at high school. Oh, wow, a Tennessee lawmaker has falsely claimed that the 3/5 compromise was to end slavery. I do kind of love it in a way when they so notably diverge from reality, just because it's so easily wrong. It's so easy to prove them wrong. But at the same time, religion often relies on the hyper bonding ability of untruth, the incentive to join together as a unique group when you believe something that nobody else believes. So in a way, Trump benefited mightily from that ability, the ability to lie so resoundingly that it bonds together people who support you, because they'll become defensive and say to others, how dare you accuse us of believing something that's patently not true? We are bound together now with cords of steel because you keep challenging our reality. So in that way, lying benefits the liar, and it benefits them more when the media is addicted to a both sides style of bipartisan devotion in their reporting that won't call people out for lying if they don't have a lie that they can ascribe to the other side. If they can't find an instance where the other side has lied as much, then they'll just gloss over the lying of one side, because they won't be able to say, well, this side did this, but this side did that. So the more extreme one side gets in their departure from standards and decency and commitment to truth, the more they benefit from a media that won't call them out, that won't perform the duty of that pillar of democracy, the fourth estate, which needs to keep the public informed as to missteps and corruption and lies. They need to call out lies, otherwise the public can't make an informed decision about who to vote for. Well, that tendency to benefit from extreme lying ensnared Trump when the crisis arose, when the pandemic arose, because too many white voters, too many urban white voters started to say, this pandemic, this does not feel like an appropriate approach to the pandemic. And there's so many inconsistencies now from Trump that I'm getting whiplash from trying to believe him, that the pandemic is a democratic beat up, but then it's also an evil imposed on us by China. So it's easy for racist people to switch from one to the other with seamless commitment to just always blaming someone. The Democrats are the devils creating a pandemic out of nothing. No, wait, the Chinese are the devils who've inflicted this terrible condition on us. They can even still believe a bit of both. One, something terrible inflicted on us by the Chinese. Damn those Chinese. I'm just going to go out and commit some act of racist violence against any person of Asian appearance that I encounter, because I live on the edge of sanity and I'm always this close to violence. At the same time saying, yeah, I'm not going to take the vaccine because COVID's been overhyped. It's not worth me taking the risk of injecting a vaccine that I would have taken if Trump was still in office, because I would have done it out of loyalty to Trump. But I'm so stuck in a collectivized oppositional defiance disorder that I cannot function as a logical, sane, responsible, community-minded person anymore. I've got hyper-individualism. I've got ODD, oppositional defiance disorder. I am stuck in a contrarian way of thinking and acting. I'm a Trump voter. Indoor Smoke says, well worth staying up for. I'm so glad. And now I will allow all of you to go to sleep. Thanks for being with me tonight as I broadcasted conversion therapy. Yes, I think I thanked Molly for that already, because I wanted to just say, yes, that evangelical Christianity is often assumed to be benign. Like, oh, yep, we don't all agree with them, we don't all adopt their religion, but surely they mean well. You know, as long as we can just say to them, please don't be too mean to any gay people, please don't disown your gay children, surely overall you'll be fine. They're not. They've got a lot of malignant impulses. They've got a lot of baked in racist assumptions that white people are superior, are Christ's chosen people. They have some baked in hostility towards non-Christian heterosexual people, that because it diverges more and more from modern inclusiveness, the Republicans are catering to those feelings of grievance, of discrepancy, by tormenting trans students, by writing legislation to exclude them from sport. Sport is a key part of many children's healthy identities. Going through school, they learn team, they learn how to contribute to a team. They learn how to think about other people's interests. They learn how to suppress their own instinct for glory in order to participate in a team victory, or just compete and enjoy a game without even winning, how to use their bodies for fun, how to gain strength, and just, really experience some of the upsides of being human. All of those things are associated with sport, and Republicans are tormenting trans teens by introducing a lot of anti-trans legislations in state after state after state, because they are pandering to the grievance culture of modern white evangelical Christianity. Most of modern white evangelical Christianity that defines itself as being antagonistic towards the inclusive tendencies of modern culture. Modern culture that has been extended by cultural milestones and cultural offerings such as Will and Grace, and anything on television that has allowed people to say, hey, you don't have to be heterosexual to have value. You don't have to be cis to have value. Cis means conforming to your birth assigned gender, doesn't it? And the oversimplification of biological science to say, oh, there's only two genders is rubbish in terms of chromosomal presentation. You can have all manner of chromosomal variances, XXX. You can have that Klinefelter syndrome. You can have androgen insensitivity syndrome, where you might be XY male at a chromosomal level, but your cells are missing a receptor that can interact with male or female hormones, or it can reject male hormones, so that then in the womb, your body develops during gestation as if you're a woman. So XY, you have male chromosomes, you have the body of a woman, and you grow up to have breasts and long legs and a pretty face, and not know until doctors conduct scans on you that you have internal testes instead of ovaries, so that you have no uterus. You never had a penis develop because testosterone didn't interact normally with your cells. So you had a default human body, which is to say female. It's the default. So people with AIS have sometimes been finalists in beauty pageants because they don't even have to shave. They don't have much testosterone at all, and they have very feminine presenting bodies, they don't have to have their periods. So if they go to see a doctor about that during adolescence and get a doctor who runs a scan, they can find out that, instead of ovaries inside their abdominal area, they have testes, and that sometimes doctors will advocate for those testes to be removed out of fear that being in a hot environment of inside your body instead of the cooler environment of being on the outside of your body between your legs, that you could develop cancer as a result. Some people have said statistics don't actually support that. You can leave the internal testes inside somebody's body without a significant increase in their risk of developing testicular cancer. So that's my little important trans talk, and a reason for us to support the rights of trans children and trans adults. We'll talk more about it another day, but until then, share the broadcast if you thought it was interesting. If you have suggestions for how to better organize it, or suggestions for somebody for me to connect with that you think would help bring this show the discipline and the structure that it probably needs, hit me up, let me know, or at least hit me up when I move to the US, which is probably happening in July. Fingers crossed. Until next time, take care, everyone. Oh, I'll just go through and thank people. Thanks, Christopher. Thanks, Indoor Smokers. So glad you love my broadcasts. Thanks, Molly. Thank you for the awards and the sponsorship, Indoor Smokers. That's really, really much appreciated. Thanks, Brett, if you're still there. Kimchi, thank you so much for being on the ball, for thanking people who support the show. And John Brown, I'll take that down as a note so I myself learn his story. Knowledge El Shabazz, thanks for being here. Marsha, thanks for your story as well. I love you. Oh, I missed this point 40 minutes ago. That was Kimchi saying that she's more worried than ever about right-wing violence. True, I'm still worried about it as well, but at least the inciter-in-chief is still alive. He still has his freedom, but he doesn't have the same platform that he had previously. So, yeah, thanks everyone. Take care and talk to you soon.